Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Writing Lives, where we showcase Jewish writers who have contributed in a variety of ways to our understanding of human nature, whether through fictional narrative, non-fiction, biography, cultural, socio-political, or historical commentary. Before we begin tonight's event, I'd first like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, on whose land Melbourne Jewish Book Week is based, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I should mention that my name is Debbie Lee, and I'm the Festival Director of Melbourne Jewish Book Week. I'm delighted to now introduce our guests this evening. Dr. Lee Kofman, who lives here in Melbourne, is the author of 6 books, including The Writer Laid Bare, Mastering Emotional Honesty in a Writer's Art, Craft and Life. Amongst her published works are several memoirs, as well as shorter works that have been widely published in Australia and overseas. Lee regularly speaks at literary events and judges literary awards, and is an experienced writing mentor and teacher of writing. Tonight, Lee is speaking with the multi-award-winning Israeli author Shifra Horn. Just as Shifra has traversed nations and vocations, her many novels have been translated from Hebrew into English, French, Dutch, German, Italian, Estonian, and Turkish. I will now hand over to Lee so we can lean into Shifra's remarkable career as both prolific author and citizen of the world. Thank you so much, Lee and Shifra.
Thank you, Debbie. That was such a beautiful introduction. I cannot wait to be talking to Shifra very soon about her books and about her life as a writer. But first, I want to tell you a very little story. So about 25 years ago, when I migrated to Australia from Israel, I brought 10 books with me along in Hebrew. They were sort of my last 10 books that I will read, I decided, before I'll completely immerse myself in English. Most of them were translated works, but one of them was a debut novel by an Israeli author. It's called Four Mothers, and it's a book about 4 generations of women living in Jerusalem. It's a family of women who are cursed to raise the daughters alone. It's a book which is really sort of in a genre of magical realism and charming and beautifully written. I think you're starting to guess whose book it was. At the time, Shifra and I shared the same publisher. That's how I got to have that debut novel. And the publisher said to me, "You really must read that book." And she was absolutely right. I was riveted by Shifra's writing from the very first minute I started reading it. Her sensual style, her rich use of metaphors, the close attention to the natural world. And I also found it instructive for my own work how attentively and imaginatively Shifra described Jerusalem, where she was born and raised. Shifra's Jerusalem has a beating pulse and a powerful personality. Like her, I wanted to write about cities that mattered to me. And also like her, I really wanted to tell women's stories. Four Mothers is still on my bookshelf. Here it is.
Oh,
From
wow.
25 years ago.
Okay.
I'm not crapping. Um, and it's still in my memory as well. So when Debbie Lee asked me initially to interview Shifra, I was absolutely thrilled. I jumped with joy, but also quite intimidated considering the literary stature of Shifra, who, as Debbie was saying before, went on to become a very successful writer, producing many nonfiction books and children's books and 5 more best-selling novels. In her fiction, I've noticed Shifra continued focusing on creating strong female characters. But in an interesting twist, in her novel we'll be discussing today, Scorpion Dance. It's a novel that came out last year in Australia in English. In this novel, Shifra writes from a point of view of a man. However, still, as in her previous books, the focus is on women because the main story of this book is the relationships that the narrator has with 2 women he loves: his grandmother, a Holocaust refugee, and also his partner, who is a young German opera singer. And another central character in this book, I'll show it again, beautiful cover, Scorpion Dance. Another central character there is, of course, Jerusalem, once again. So we're going to talk about this remarkable novel, enriching themes and emotions, and we're going to talk about what it takes to be a writer, particularly an Israeli woman writer today. But I want to first start with a non-literary question to Shifra because she has lived such an interesting life. When I was doing my research for today's conversation, I came across the following passage on Shifra's website. It's really literally stopped me in my tracks. I'm going to read it. It's very short. Shifra's achievements included the discovery of a village of Jewish Marranos who had kept the Jewish identity secret for over 500 years. Horn's activity in the village of Belmonte in northwest Portugal resulted in the entire population converting fully to Judaism. Wow. So, Shifra, can you please tell us who were Marranos and what have you done in that village?
Oh my goodness, it's a very long story, and it was in so many years ago. I was a educational officer of WUJES, World Union of Jewish Students, an umbrella organization for all Jewish unions all around the world. And I decided to concentrate actually in countries that had no relationship with Israel, like Iran, like the Jews in Syria, the Russia before when, and then I got a book that was written by Schwartz, who was an engineer that built all the bridges in Oporto, Portugal, in North Portugal. And he wrote about a very interesting sect of people that didn't want to work on Saturday. And he discovered actually that they are a Jew in disguise. They went to a church, whatever, but deep inside them, they were Jews, they were Marranos, Judeos, as they were called in Portugal. So I went to Belmonte, the village, which they had the majority of Marranos there. I went with my friend, which was a Spanish girl that converted to Judaism after she discovered her roots. And we had about 2 weeks there. And then I brought a group of Jewish students from Spain, Portugal, Ceuta, Melilla, and Gibraltar. And we had a seminar over there about the Marranos, which is a very interesting story. You can read about it, whatever. And there was a boy that was 13 years old he rushed after me, Olo, and he said to me, I want to celebrate bar mitzvah. And few years later, when he was 23, he became the head of the community, which was still Marranos. They lit candles in a kind of a shelter. They didn't want that their neighbors will know anything, that they still preserve Judaism. They had seder in the cellar, whatever. But this boy, when he becomes a leader, he wrote a letter to the prime minister then and to the head of the WZO, the World Zionist Organization, and asked them to send them a rabbi. And this rabbi came. I was invited after 10 years to the first dedication of a new synagogue after 500 years. And the village became Jewish village. If you will visit it there, you will see even a museum for the Marranos. And the history is I was thrilled when I lived there, but they still light Shabbat candle in a cellar. They light them openly next to a window, but still they have a very special, which I don't have here, I could show you. It's one candle made of tin. On behind you have a mirror, so when you light it, you can see the reflection of two lights because of the mirror.
Extraordinary. What a beautiful story. And this is
Yeah.
only one of the many, many stories that happened to you, Shifra. I mean, I did quite a bit of research about your life. That was when you were much younger, but in following years, you've
Very
done
young and very adventurous. Yeah.
adventures.
Yes.
But still you are. And I wonder, do you use some of your experiences in your fiction?
Listen, I will tell you a story. I was a journalist before I became a writer, a serious writer, and I was sent to an Israeli, very famous children's writer. And I asked her a very naive and a silly question: how do you write? How do you write? And people ask me, I don't know how to explain, but she gave me a cake, a plum cake, and she said, I write as I bake. I open everything around me. I open the cupboard in the refrigerator. And I take, the flour and eggs and oil or margarine. And if I have plums, I put it all over. And I put it in a pot. I put it in the oven, and I got the cake. But when you have the cake, you cannot take the cake and try to find the ingredients that you put inside. It's all a different, how do you say, subject, object, whatever. So it's every writer is taking from his background. And for me, I was very much, let's say, my source of inspiration come from Jerusalem. Wherever you go, the city is like an open air museum, that wherever you go, there is some historical background or a biblical story behind it. It's like a surreal bubble, Jerusalem, that everything and anything can happen here. And it was a playground of my childhood. And, those are my material. So, so I don't take from my life experience, but I take from all around. And I cannot tell you that this sentence came from this one, or the description is from a certain house or whatever, because it will spoil the story.
You mentioned Jerusalem, Shifra, of course, unsurprisingly, and I wonder, what has it been like to live in Jerusalem in the last 18 months since October 7?
Yeah, Lee, I have to ask you a favor. I send you a paragraph from my latest book, The Room in Front of the Walls. I'm a terrible reader, and I will appreciate if you will read it. And I'm sorry for that. I
No, of
burdened you
course.
with that.
Of course, I'll be delighted to do this. Would you like me to read the entire passage that you sent me?
Oh, you can choose whatever you want. It's okay.
Okay. I might do just the first section, only because there's so many more questions I would love to ask you, but it's such a
Okay.
beautiful passage and I will be delighted to read it. So thank you for asking. My Jerusalem, a hungry widow, the city that was violated time after time by its conquerors. Mercilessly, they pushed up the hem of her tattered dress, penetrated her darkest recesses, and filled her with the divine punishment of their missions and their faith. And she bowed her head and submitted to them. Sometimes, because she had no choice, with closed eyes and gritted teeth, and sometimes like a willing whore who spreads her legs gaily for every copulation. As payment and in return for her favors, her rulers adorned her with luxurious palaces, surrounded her with high walls, built her silver and golden domes and spires, whose tips pierced the holy heavens. In my Jerusalem, history reigns. Rivers of blood were spilled in its alleyways, its houses and its temples were burned to ashes, and like the phoenix, it shook its wings and returned to life. In this city lived my heroes. They loved, rejoiced, reproduced, felt pain, took pleasure, suffered, starved, wept, and waited long and futilely for the Messiah to come, for better times, until they departed the world written with disappointments and regrets. Today, I struggle to recognize the city where I was born. Crosses, crescents, and stars of David reside side by side on bed terms, while the cries of the muezzin, the thunder of the Ramadan canons, the ringing of the church bells, the blasts of the shofar, and the throbbing prayers in the synagogue cry out, "Mine, she is all. It's all mine." My Jerusalem, the city that was reunited, is still divided and oozes in forbidden directions into places where it didn't exist before, and high walls and monstrous towers are erected above it. And so it disintegrates from within, rots in its distress, and delusional people, troublemakers, walk within it, appropriating its past and its treasures, and once again dividing it in half, in quarters, in eighths. And I share my city's pain. As always, when I think about my Jerusalem, my conscience is awakened and torments me. So I couldn't help myself. I had to read the whole thing. It's so beautiful.
Okay, thank you so much. And this is my Jerusalem today. Actually, I'm very lonely here because most of my girlfriend just left the city. The city became very poor city, actually, and lots of ultra-Orthodox are coming from all over too. And I'm really very much afraid that the balance will be changed between secular and ultra-Orthodox. So this is my very sad city, which I love and hate at the same time.
Absolutely. And you depict a very different Jerusalem in Scorpion Dance in a novel that just came out last year here. Could you maybe talk a little bit about Scorpion Dance now, what the novel is about, and also what kind of Jerusalem you portray in that book?
Yeah, it's a story that follows a man, Orion. Actually, he lost his father in 1967 in 6 Days War, and he was raised, before he was born, he was raised by two women. Aviva is his mother. It's a kind of a flower girl that doesn't know exactly how to treat him. But his educator, his role model is Johanna. She lived in a garage underneath their house, and she came from Germany. She's a midwife. And what is interesting about Johanna, she has a big resentment towards everything that came from Germany or German or whatever. And she kept on telling Orion that Germany is not a good place for you. But Orion lives take a turn when he fell in love with an opera singer. He called her Basherta, Bashert, my destiny in Yiddish. And she came to Israel in order to atone in an organization that is called Kapara. I don't know whether you've heard about it. It was established in 1958 by a German man. And since then, young Germans come to Israel to atone their ancestors' crime. And they work with the Holocaust survivors, which the population is decreasing through the years. They talk with the children, with people in need. And and that girl, which is called Basherte by Orion, came in order to atone her grandfather's sins, because her grandfather was a Gestapo man. But the book is actually a love story, or impossible love story, between a German woman and an Israeli boy who is a second generation to a Holocaust survivors.
It's a very, very powerful premise. And you mentioned atonement, Shifra, and I'm very interested in this topic of atonement. And the young woman who comes to Israel, as you said, to atone, she's a very complex character. She genuinely, she wants to atone to the extent that she is prepared to convert to Judaism. But on the other hand, she is also honest enough to talk about her love for her grandfather, who was a Nazi. So it's a very sort of conflicted situation. What is your
Exactly.
personal opinion? Do you think she should atone? And do you think people can atone for something like that, especially for the sins of their forefathers?
It's a second and third generation. Some of them didn't even know their grandparents, and they have a deep feeling of atonement. They have to come, they have to do something. They've heard about the Holocaust, they've heard about the disaster, they've heard about the death camps, and they have a drive to come over because they want, I think, maybe to clear their conscience, even though they were not the criminals.
And is it possible, do you think? Is it possible
I
for your character?
I think it will, for those that have the conscious, I'm talking about those, I think it will haunt them. It will be a shadow that will follow them all their life.
And speaking about complexity of characters, Orion, the protagonist, is such a remarkable, compelling character. He really stayed with me. He is a man who is haunted, the way I read him at least, he really haunted by the past, by the burdens of his mother and his grandmother, who both came from Holocaust. And he seems to be so haunted that he can't even understand, let alone engage in his present life. Do you think this is typical of children of Holocaust survivors to be in this sort of state of mind, to be burdened to such extent?
Yes, I think so. As a second generation myself, and I was born to, my father was from Ukraine, my mother was from a Spanish origin, but we live in a silence, but we felt the tension. We felt the deep trauma of our parents, that we heard the whispers, we heard the crying at night, the shouting at night. We didn't fully understand what happened only when we were grown up. And I think it's, in my opinion, as a result for that, we often develop a strong sense of responsibilities for our parents. And we try to give them a naches. We try to be very good in school and marry the right man and makes them happy in all means as we had. Even in my book, I describe Orion as he's trying to walk in a strange way at home in order to please his mother. His mother was found as a baby that was thrown away from a transportation train and towards Auschwitz, and she was adopted by Nan but she had no memories, but he could feel it. He wanted to make her happy. He wanted, and then she deserted him in a certain way, which I'm not going to tell. Yes. And I think that I channeled the story of the second generation in my writing in order to understand. I feel that most of them suffer from a kind of a trauma or a phobia. Orion himself cannot go inside an elevator. He cannot fly. He never flies until he had to visit his basherte. And he has a phobia from scorpions as well. So I really identify with him because I have the same phobias, especially from heights and traveling by airplanes, even though my husband lives in New Zealand and in Australia.
So now we know about your connection to antipodes.
Yes,
Now we
exactly.
understand. Yeah. Because you'll be coming to us again later this year, which is wonderful.
October, yes.
Yeah, but it's interesting how we circled back to one of my earlier questions about how much of your life experience goes into your fiction. I want to talk to you more about the terrible legacy of Holocaust, which is so prominent in this wonderful novel. I really found it compelling that you particularly zoomed in onto that aspect of the Holocaust history, of the burning of the books. I knew about it too. I mean, I read about it quite a lot, but I didn't realize until reading your book how many, what huge numbers actually were destroyed. And I just wonder if you could tell us a bit about why did you decide to explore, to focus on this particular aspect of Holocaust history?
I don't know how to answer there, but from very early age, my mother used to give me books about the Holocaust. I remember the first book, of course, was Anna Frank Diary, and then Katsetnik, which was a Holocaust survivor, and he actually wrote horror books, and Primo Levi, and so on. And I was a bit obsessed about it. I was really obsessed about the subject. I never studied deeply into it, but I read a lot of literature about the Holocaust.
Of course.
Especially when I knew that my father's family, all of them, were perished in Odessa. So, and all my life I felt sorry for him because he was very lonely, no family, was a bitter and twisted a bit till his death, till I found him a relative in Odessa. And this is a different story.
I'm from Odessa too, Shifra. So you traveled to Odessa.
I've been to Odessa because I was very fortunate. I was chosen to go on my ancestors' route in the film Who Do You Think You Are? And they sent me to Odessa, and they sent me to the catacomb in Odessa where my family were burned actually by Romanian. That was, you know, the Nazi didn't kill all of us. Actually, the Romanians, the Dutch, all of them cooperate with the Nazis in order to get rid of the Jews. So in Odessa, I found my father a relative, and I came to him after I've been there, and I told him, sit down, drink a water, I found you a relative in Odessa. And he cried and he said, at long last, I have a family. And they came to visit him. Half a year later, he died, knowing that at least he has a cousin, a second cousin in Odessa.
This is such a moving story. Thank you so much for sharing it, Shifra.
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
to talk a little bit now about your writing style,
Okay.
which I find wonderful, having read a few of your books now. So one of the critics who reviewed Scorpion Dance described your writing there, your prose, as sometimes liturgical. And I know that you studied Bible as well at university. That was your focus. Do you feel that the biblical language, first of all, does it resonate with you what that reviewer said, but also do you generally find that the language of the Bible influenced the way you write?
Yeah, it does. Because in Israel, you study Bible studies from age 8 or 9. And I was supposed to study law, and I was chosen by the university. And on the last moment, I got cold feet, and I decided to study what I love, which is Bible studies and archaeology, Israeli archaeology. And yes, as a child, we ought to study lots of phrases from the Bible by heart. And some people said that my writing in Hebrew is too difficult to read because I have a kind of an old-fashioned language. Even my granddaughters doesn't understand me at all. But I think it's an influence, and I'm happy about it because we have such a rich language. And I love reading the Bible. I just love reading it again and again. And it's actually my favorite book.
It's such a rich language, and I was thinking also as I was reading this bit that you sent me about Jerusalem, just reading it aloud, the rhythm of it, the cadences really reminded me of the biblical of some biblical passages which are particularly poetic. Have you been thinking of any particular passages when you were writing it? Kind of made me think about the prophets, actually.
Yes, it is, because Jerusalem is a female. You know, in the Bible, it's a she, actually. And think about female and male cities. For example, even in Australia, I think that Sydney is very masculine and Melbourne is a female, or Roma is a masculine and Florence is female. It's in my opinion, I don't know whether anyone wrote about it. So sometimes Jerusalem is a widow, miserable widow, hungry widow, sometimes she's a whore. And there is a lot of phrases about Jerusalem in the Bible. And I took it from there, actually, I have to admit, in the paragraphs that you read.
And it's a very bold passage, which brings me to another question I wanted to ask you about Scorpion Dance and generally about your writing. So in Scorpion Dance, you sort of flirt with the idea of incest. Even though it's not explicit, but Orion is attraction and love to this young German opera singer, in sort of often expressed as he draws parallels between her and his grandmother. He really sees them as almost the same woman sometimes. And then in another book what you wrote, The Fairest of Them All, I think it's called, The Fairest Among Women, sorry.
Fairest Among Women, yeah.
That's right. So in
Yes.
that beautiful novel, your protagonist gets pregnant by her uncle when she's only a teenager, and they get married. So I wonder whether this is quite a taboo subject, and you bravely sort of played with this across a few works. So what attracts you about this particular topic?
I was hoping you are not going to ask me the question.
Sorry.
Because, listen, married an uncle, it was often in the community of my mother, because she came from Mashhad. They were Maranos themselves. They have to convert to Islam in 1852. I don't know whether you've heard about the Mashhadi community. And yeah, they were converters as well, because there was a blood label. It's a very long story, and they converted to Islam to escape from all that. And in their communities, they used to marry with cousins, with uncles, in order to keep Judaism in the family and in order to keep the wealth in the family, because it's a very, very wealthy community. Now they are all around the world, in Los Angeles, a bit in Israel, in London. There is a very rich community of Mashhadi, which became very rich because they were Muslims, so they could go all around the world, and they were merchant. And there is even a quarter in Jerusalem, and it's after my great uncle, which was Hajj. Listen to that, Adoniah Cohen, because he went to Mecca and he had a totafot under his turban. Wow. And he had a tiny little prayer book inside his Quran. So all of them went to Mecca in order to prove their neighbors that they are a good Muslims. So my great uncles were all Hajj. But listen, Hajj Adoniah Cohen, what a Jewish name. But I think that about, and Johanna was not his, I don't want to make any spoiler, but Johanna actually raised him, and she was a beautiful woman.
Johanna is the grandmother, I'll just say, so but
the German one, she was a midwife, as I said, but it's the figures that, I don't know how to say it. It's like, have you heard about the attachment theory? Yes. That you get attached to somebody that remind you your parent, your father or your mother in a case of a man, or a caregiver. So it's up subconsciously that you feel attachment to somebody that remind you some dominant figure from your life, even though it's not always healthy, you know, because if you were abused in your childhood by your father, you're finding yourself an abuser or whatever. So I think it's a human mind forms this kind of attachment. And that's why, in my opinion, Orion fell in love with somebody that remind him of the most incredible or important woman in his life, not his father, Johanna, which he believed all his life that she's his grandmother. Actually, she raised his father.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about Scorpion Dance also once again in light of your other fiction, and you yourself wrote about this novel, saying that you sort of like broke a glass ceiling there of women's fiction by choosing to tell this particular novel from a point of view of a man. So would you mind telling us a little bit about that decision, and was it difficult to write from a point of view of a man?
It's a very long story because all my books were, all the books that I've written till now happened in my life. The story, it was like a prophecy that came through in my life. Even if you remember, Four Mothers, a baby girl was born with a tooth. And my husband is a dentist, and he said, "Oh, I like your writing, but I never seen such a phenomenon that a baby girl or a boy were born with a tooth. It's your imagination is too wild for me." And 10 years later, there was a home delivery. The mother of the woman was a doula, and the woman that gave birth was my daughter-in-law. She decided to give birth at home, exactly as I described in Four Mothers. And where they cleaned the baby's mouth, the finger was bitten. My granddaughter, my first granddaughter, was born with a tooth. And on, I can talk about it forever.
Wow.
The worst happened in Ode to Joy, which was a book before I wrote Scorpion Dance. And I wrote about terrible incident, a suicide bomber inside a bus. And the heroine is driving behind the bus. She's playing peekaboo with a girl, or she didn't know it was a boy with long blonde hair. She turned, in Hebrew we call this game cuckoo. She always jumps. They are both
Peekaboo,
in a traffic light, and this boy is hiding, and then he pop up and she follows, and then he disappeared in a smoke. There was a suicide bomber. It's a true story that happened next to where I lived in Gilo. And she's looking for this. She thought it's a girl, and it's actually a love story. But in the book, I write the post-trauma, the Hadassah Hospital, whatever, and about the day that everything changed in her life. And she count her years before and after that day, and everybody called the day in a different name. Her husband say your episode, her friend, which is psychologist, calls your post-trauma, somebody called your illness or something, the accident, but she calls it and I will tell you something very intimate. After I wrote the book, I fainted for the first time. And then after 3 months, I was diagnosed with acute leukemia. I was in Hadassah Hospital. I suffer from a post-trauma. And my life are now divided before and after my sickness. This is the way I count my years, my months, whatever. And then I decided that I'm not going to write anymore, because whatever I write happened in my life. After 8 years of that, I decided to write a story that was by a masculine first person, and it's him. I try to, to sense that my destiny away. It's not me, it's him. I'm not the protagonist. I'm not the person that it's Orion. So I try to to run away from the destinies that always, or the prophecy that always happened in my books. And my last book, I ended it with happy end. So I decided to, it's the first time that I ended a book in happy end and in order to turn away the bad luck or my destiny. And about writing as a man, and instead of being a prey, I become a predator. I looked at men looking at women. What they look first, the eyes, the head, their legs, their bust, whatever they look first. And of course, I consulted with a lot of men, including my husband, that can walk behind a woman and he knows exactly what kind of underwear she's wearing and if it's flatter her or not. So I will not go deeper into that. And I felt very much at ease. I felt very much at ease while writing in a male first person masculine. But Orion is working in a woman, he's a librarian. He's not a macho, he's not a fighter, he's very soft. He's very womanizer type of a man. And because he was raised by women only, he can identify with women. He can understand women fully.
He feels very authentic. I just want to thank you profusely for being so honest and telling us such intimate and very, very moving stories. And I'm blown away by your story about how prophetic your writing can be. And I can actually relate to this because when I was in my mid-20s, I wrote a novella about a particular kind of relationship. It sounded to me then absolutely improbable. And then I found myself in a very similar relationship about 5 years later. So it's extraordinary what writing can do. And this brings me to a question about the process of writing, actually. I do know that you regularly lecture about different things, and one of them is you talk about what it takes to be a writer, what conditions we need to write successfully. So, of course, I don't expect you to repeat the whole lecture here, but maybe a few main takeaways you could offer us.
I will quote Amos Oz, my big mentor.
Oh,
May he rest in peace. He said that in order to write books, you need two conditions. You need a grandmother who told you story and a tough childhood. About my grandmother, I was a fifth in a live generation of women. I have my mother, my grandmother, her mother, and her mother. So fifth one, which is very, very rare. All of them married very young and died at the age of 100 or 99 years old, whatever. So, but it's not that they sat on my bedside and told me stories, but stories were heard around the house, especially from the Ottoman period, which was a very interesting period in Israel history. And as you can read, my previous books are always historical background, very accurate historical background, and I love to come back to the Ottoman Empire ruling Israel, especially in my last book, The Room in Front of the Walls. Tough childhood. My parents were communist. I was raised during the 50s where McCartney just persecuted the writers and screenwriters and in America. So to be a communist in Israel those years was a no-no, a big no-no. And as a child, I was persecuted as well. And Israel in the 50s was very poor countries and suffered from post-trauma of 1948 war. So this is my background. I will, of course, as a woman writer, I will add Virginia Woolf in her amazing book, A Room of One's Own. which she said that to be a woman writer, you need three conditions. You need room of your own, you need a lock or a door, and you need a salary of £5 a year, otherwise you cannot write. And she actually had a room. Her husband was a publisher. I think, by the way, I think he was a Jew, and she had a room. He was a Jew, and she had her room over there. And whenever she wrote, she put a note on her door: "Please do not disturb." A genius in writing. I'm joking about it. And I think that in order to be a writer, you have to live in an inspiring area. And in one condition, in my condition, is Jerusalem.
Shifra, there's so many more things I want to ask you, but I know we sort of a bit tight for time. So I'm just going to ask you last question now, out of many I prepared. You talked about one of the conditions being living in an interesting place, and we talked about Jerusalem, but I also want to talk to you about being an Israeli writer at the moment, at this time after October 7, and somebody like yourself who is an internationally recognized writer who has been translated to so many languages. You got quite a few overseas awards. I know you travel to different countries to talk about your books. Do you feel that your literary life has been impacted since October 7th?
They were destroyed, actually. There is a boycott on Israeli writers, especially in Europe. And I'm not invited to any festivals, writer festivals. For example, my last book was printed in Italy. I'm very lucky, Italian likes me. And they used to invite me to Rome, to interviews, to talk about my book. And even though my book was a book of a month and got very good reclaim in the newspaper, I was not invited, not to a seminar, not to a book writers festival. I was not invited to Rome. And I feel very blessed that my Scorpion Dance was published in Australia in English, because I really wanted people to read the book and understand. Yeah, and understand what we have been through, what is to be a second generation to a Holocaust survivor, as I know that in Australia you have the second biggest population of Holocaust survivors after Israel, and this generation is fading away, unfortunately. And I want people to hear the stories.
Thank you so much, Shifra. I just want to quickly mention before I hand back to Debbie that Shifra's book is available in Australia, everywhere, and she was also published by a Jewish publisher here as well. So it will be great to support both the publisher and Shifra, of course.
And I'm very happy about my hybrid publishers. They actually edited the book in a fantastic way. And thank you. Thank you, Louis and Anna.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to both of you. Shifra, we extend an invitation to you anytime. We would love to see you live in Australia. We would love to feature you at Melbourne Jewish Book Week. I'm saying that on behalf of the programming committee, who I haven't consulted with, but I'm sure that I am, that they will be saying yes, yes, yes to that. So
Yes.
A remarkable writer, a remarkable life story, a remarkable mind to be able to be so prescient in so many ways. I know that's both good and bad, but your ability, that the insight you have into humanity to understand what might happen is almost, as you say, unnerving. But I do hope that you never ever stop writing again. Keep going.
Oh, I'm paralyzed. Since the war, I didn't write, even not a list for a grocery shop. I'm just paralyzed for a year and a half. And I'm not the only one, yes.
It's tragic, it's understandable, but we will persevere. And I'm sure that that passion and need to write will regenerate in time. for now, we're just blessed to have had you on our Writing Live series, and I thank you both, you and Lee. I could not have paired a better interview in terms of background, in terms of experience, in terms of even, you know, the Israeli, the connections to Odessa, everything that has happened. You have come together for a purpose, and I'm really grateful on behalf of Melbourne Jewish Book Week, I should say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you very much, Lee, for the most intelligent questions. And thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much. You moved me.
Good night. Thank you both. Good night.